Hey everyone, hope you're doing well out there and welcome back. So today's video is one that quite honestly, I've had on my list for months and months and months that I've been wanting to do and wanting to share. This is one of those videos where I've just been taking notes and thinking about it, studying more, learning more, reading more, refining my understanding of it. And today was just kind of that day where I woke up and I'm like, you know what? It's time to put this video out. It's time to do it. So here we are. So today's video is all about psychedelic therapy and the various models as we understand them, as I understand them, based on the available information here at the end of 2022. But before I kind of get into the main meat of the content here and start sharing the different models with you, I want to first just kind of say a couple quick kind of caveats just to kind of set a right understanding before we go ahead and get into the conversation. Hey everybody, quick little interjection here. So I'm just kind of finishing up editing the video and I was just going through and I noticed that the last couple segments of the video here, the audio switches to the camera audio instead of the microphone audio here. And so I just want to let you know that that happens. So the audio quality does kind of drop and degrade just a little bit, but it still should be pretty listenable and audible, even if it's not quite as nice of a quality. Anyways, thanks for your patience with these minor glitches as they do happen on occasion, but otherwise it should be a good video and I hope you enjoy it. All right, back to the content. But first, before we go ahead and dive into the topic here, I want to just take a couple moments and kind of set your expectations and remind you a couple things just so you have a proper orientation around this information and about myself before we get into what all these different models are. So a couple quick caveats here, basically. So first thing to say is that most of these models that I'm about to describe to you are my description based on information that I've pulled together from my kind of voracious, hungry, passionate pulling together of information from all over the internet. So it would be fair to say that most of these models of therapy are not publicly available. They're not publicly taught. They are in development. They are largely probably still considered experimental. And I'm doing my best based on the available information out there to kind of pull all of that together and try to make a clear, coherent picture. So with that being said, I may have got certain details wrong. I may have gotten certain things completely wrong. I may misrepresent something, overemphasize something that's no longer true, et cetera, et cetera. So please take it all with a grain of salt and understand that, that I'm doing my best to try to demystify this by pulling together all this information. But, a lot of it's fairly hidden, private, and not well articulated at this point in time. Another thing I want to say about this, just in case it's not clear, in case I haven't been clear on the channel about this, I'm not a licensed therapist, but I am pretty literate when it comes to different types of therapy. I'm a bit of a nerd for studying psychology, and I'm a hypnotherapist and an NLP practitioner and a coach. So I'm familiar with different approaches to working with human beings and psychology in general, but I'm not licensed. I'm not, I'm not a clinical, therapist or anything like that. So do take that with a grain of salt. Also, there are many, many approaches. This is important for you to understand to psychedelic therapy in general. I think there's a common misconception out there for people who may be new to this world, may kind of just see it as this mysterious thing, which again, I'm hoping to demystify in this video. It's often seen, I think, as one thing, one skill, one approach, one way of doing this. And I would say that's simply not true. There are many, many different schools of thought, many, many different approaches and ways of doing and applying therapeutic work in a psychedelic context. So I want you to understand that and really keep your mind open about this, because there are very different approaches that I'm about to describe to you that would all fall under the umbrella descriptor of psychedelic therapy. Last thing I want to say here is that I'm deliberately excluding shamanism, NEG work, anything that isn't explicitly therapy, because while they may be healing, and while, quite honestly, they can be profoundly healing for some people, I don't know that it's accurate to call them psychedelic therapy per se. And I don't know when we're using that term if that's what most people mean. So I'm kind of leaving that out. That's its own topic. And quite honestly, when it comes to shamanism, I'm not a student of shamanism, and I wouldn't want to misrepresent it or dishonor any of those schools or traditions. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into the various descriptions. I've got 10 different models here for you. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so the first one I'm going to share with you here may be the kind of classic archetype of psychedelic therapy based on what you've heard about or read about, or what you think of when you think about psychedelic therapy. And I will say before I go ahead and describe it that I think this is actually one of the more unique approaches. And this would be what we could call maybe the psychedelic study model, right? So this would be approaches that you might see in the Johns Hopkins studies, in the Harvard studies, probably in Stanford studies. In other words, in the kind of psychedelic work that's being done in laboratories where they're kind of pioneering different approaches to psychedelic therapy, this seems to be the model that they're using, more or less, give or take, right? So it's usually something like quite a few sessions of therapy before the psychedelic session. We're looking at probably a minimum of 2 sessions, but it sounds more like 4, maybe even 8 or 12 sessions of therapy before the psychedelic session. And then from what I understand, they go for high dose, somewhere in the ballpark of, say, 5 to 6 dry grams of psilocybin to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 milligrams of pure, just the psilocybin without the mushroom, which I think these people are taking synthetic, not dried mushrooms, but it's kind of the equivalent there. And the session is with 2 sitters, right? No guidance, not minimal guidance. Let's say they're kind of more just holding space, being silent. You've got the blindfolds, you've got the headphones with the playlist, going inward, the person just having the experience they're going to have. And it sounds like really the orientation is towards shooting them for a mystical experience, for an ego death experience, something like that, a really powerful transcendence of self and concept into this kind of more classic, intense psychedelic experience. Afterwards, they have more therapy on the back end of it, usually a day or 2 later within the next 48 hours. And as far as I understand, that's like another 4 sessions of therapy, maybe more. Often these, based on, say, the Harvard manual, looks like there's an emphasis on ACT or some sort of brief therapy. And there's an emphasis on recovering or connecting to core values during the sessions. So what are values? Values are things that are important to us. So a lot of times when people come in, they need healing. Especially if they're deeply depressed, they are deeply anxious about something. We usually, when we're in these kinds of states, we feel disconnected from emotional resonance with that which is deeply important to us, right? So we are dissociated, if you will, or disconnected from our values, our core values, and the things that really make our heart shine, our being radiate with the greatest depth of happiness and well-being. So one of the focuses in these approaches seems to be very non-directive again, go into it, but there's kind of this orientation towards perhaps helping the person to either have a mystical experience or recover or explore, these deeply meaningful values to them. So that's kind of what I'm calling the psychedelic study model. Okay, and next we're about to move into kind of a series of different models that I think share a similar kind of core mindset or approach or theme, but I'm going to name them as separate models because they do have subtle distinctions or variations or different focuses a little bit. All of these models tend to operate upon the idea of trying to use the psychedelic to get past what is known in therapy or psychology as dissociation, which is one form of our kind of unconscious body, mind, nervous system defense mechanisms. So Typically speaking, if someone's been through a really difficult experience, a traumatic experience, something like that, we tend to experience what's called dissociation. There are other defense mechanisms, and dissociation usually involves maybe repression or suppression, where we have a hard time accessing maybe the memories, the emotions, the meanings, the core beliefs that have been formed out of a difficult period of our lives or a traumatic incident or moment or experience. So all of these that I'm about to describe here tend to kind of fall under this same approach of what I call the suffer and purge approach to therapy. And I realize it's not a really flattering way to describe it, but I do think that's fairly accurate, where the emphasis is on trying to get past the dissociative defense mechanisms to try to get to the material underneath, where maybe the wounding or the issues or the emotions that are kind of stored there are. I have my own criticisms about these approaches. I'll just say really quick that I've seen a lot of, first of all, I think this is based in kind of an older model of therapy that while it can work, can be very destructive. I do think that suffer and purge as an approach really risks re-traumatization for people a lot more. I've seen a lot of people who have applied these approaches maybe on their own, not prepared, or with a underskilled therapist, and they end up having panic attacks after their sessions, or feeling overwhelmed, or feeling more dissociated. They tend to encounter a lot of inner, suffering and struggle and pain and resistance. And this emphasis on getting past defenses, fighting ourselves kind of in a sense, and on getting to the painful material as if that's the only way to heal, I think can be incredibly unkind, and can make the work harder than it needs to be. But that's just my own opinion. There are a lot of therapists out there who would say this is how it's done and this is the way to do it, and you've got to just suffer through it, and suffering is the way to healing. So take that for what you will. But this next kind of chunk of approaches here, I think kind of all fall under this umbrella of suffer and purge, if you will. So let's list them off here. So the first of these models is something I learned about in a book called Psychedelic Psychotherapy by Coleman, which is an excellent book. I think it's a really useful kind of primer on understanding psychedelic therapy if you have no sense of it. So in Coleman's approach, as he describes it in the book, essentially what we're doing is we are taking a psychedelic, whether that's mushrooms or LSD or MDMA or some combination thereof, to try to, again, uncover the painful material, to kind of get under or past or get by our defenses and get down to whatever the real core issue is, and then feel and process that out. And that's often the purge aspect, which could be anything from trembling, shaking, crying, sweating, vomiting, screaming, whatever you need to do to kind of move that energy once you've gotten in touch with whatever core memories, core emotions, core beliefs are there kind of underneath it. So in psychedelic psychotherapy, he advocates for dose-wise a moderate dose. He kind of says, actually, you want to go lower dose than you think, because once you start to get into these places inside of ourselves, the work becomes really intense. And not only does it become intense, you kind of need a certain amount of your mind and your cognition present. And because it's so intense, you don't need as much of the psychedelic in order to feel or to access feeling. It really starts to happen. So I think that's worth noting. Structurally, it sounds like he's doing a bunch of sessions with the person beforehand, before there's a psychedelic session involved, to make sure that they're on the right track. They've built a strong kind of what's the word? Therapeutic alliance. In other words, a strong rapport with the therapist and the client. They're really building a sense of connection and dialogue and mutual understanding about what the issue might be or is. And they're building a sense of safety so that the person can really kind of deep dive and go there with whatever needs healing. So that's essentially the psychedelic psychotherapy model. He talks a lot about different qualities of, say psilocybin for emotional work, LSD, and how it can be a little stark for some people, but for other people, it can be great for cutting through something that we're trying to hide from, MDMA for creating safety, for trauma work, this kind of a thing. And like I said before, I really admire the book. I thought it was well written. It's very, very clear and cogent and understandable. And just the fact that he's been doing this work for this long, I think is amazing and beautiful and worthy of a lot of respect. But I have my own concerns, again, about these kinds of approaches, because again, I've seen a lot of people who do this kind of work either on themselves or with a therapist and end up more traumatized or more triggered or more dysregulated afterwards. And I feel like it's a little unkind to ourselves to take this approach, but according to our Coleman, it works really well. So this would be the kind of psychedelic psychotherapy model. So that's number one. Let's keep going here. All right. Next on the list here is one that is a bit notorious. There are a lot of people following this model. I don't necessarily recommend it. I've seen a lot of people kind of hurt themselves or have issues after doing this, but it's worth mentioning because I think it's already out there in the zeitgeist as a thing, and that's the MDMA solo model. Same basic idea, except instead of using maybe LSD or psilocybin, in this model, they're using MDMA. And the idea is you take your MDMA by yourself and you use the MDMA to go in, again, past your own defense mechanisms and try to reprocess whatever there is to process that may have traumatized you and move through it. I, again, have my concerns about the safety of this approach. And while it can work, it is very intense and it is very extreme because MDMA really softens the defenses like powerfully. And when our defenses are that softened and we haven't really negotiated with our inner defenders, if you will, the parts of us that want to protect and stabilize us, and you just kind of go in, you can end up going in really deep, maybe deeper than you're prepared to hold space for, be attentive to, or process. So there's that. There's also the issue, if I'm going to be frank here, that I see a lot of people who take MDMA and have these thoughts that float through our minds, as happens when we're on medicine, that may or may not be accurate, true, or correct. And we don't have any way of verifying some of the information that we get. And it can be tempting to take it literally. And sometimes we're having a metaphoric communication from our unconscious that we're mistaking for a literal memory or literal experience. Sometimes it's blended. It's not always so easy to know what exactly is fact or true when it's just subjective internal memory we're talking about here. So, but the basic idea is taking MDMA, going really deep, using that sense of safety, that sense of connectedness, that sense of maybe love or compassion or comfort, that gives us the power, the empowerment, and the comfort to really look in the dark corners of our psyche, ask our deeper self, what is it that's causing this, and then process through whatever comes up. So that's MDMA solo. Okay, so next on our list is IFS as applied to psychedelic therapy. So this is one that I know of. It's one that I know exists a lot in the psychedelic therapy community. I don't know if there's an official model of using IFS in psychedelic therapy, but it's one that psychedelic therapists seem to gravitate towards and seem to really like. So for those of you that aren't familiar, the basics of IFS, it's also called internal family systems, is a form of therapy where we relate to different parts of our personality. The working theory is kind of that as a byproduct of kind of development and growing up and just a natural thing that happens with the mind as we grow into adults, is that we tend to compartmentalize, possibly even fragment into extremes, or just kind of generally develop different parts of our personality. And these different parts, you can almost think of as like sub-personalities with their own particular needs, particular desires, particular roles, particular agendas, value systems, this kind of a thing. And these parts interact in different ways inside of us and have different relationships to each other and to us as a whole. So in IFS, what we do a lot, what probably is being done in psychedelic therapy with IFS is that person is taking the medicine, going inside. I'm sure they're doing sober IFS first, and then taking the medicine, going inside, and having a conversation with the different parts to see if something can't be maybe resolved, healed, let go of, transformed, understood more deeply, connected to, this kind of a thing. So there's a lot of negotiating with different parts. There's a lot of having different parts connect to each other or share other parts that they may be hiding or protecting, this kind of a thing. It's again, something that's very popular, that's done a lot. And it's a very kind of modern form of therapy. Here's kind of my take with IFS. So I should say really quick, again, I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not trained in IFS, but as part of my training in NLP and hypnotherapy, they do teach parts work. Parts work is essentially a different style of IFS. Or we could say IFS is a type of parts work, I think might be more accurate. So there are certain things I may not know or understand exactly about IFS, but in general, I am trained in parts work, so it's something I'm a bit familiar with. And here's kind of what I see happening with people who go really deep in IFS. On the positive side, IFS can be really useful for kind of getting past the blocks inside of ourselves and resolving internal resistance. If we have any sort of internal conflicts, any aspects of ourselves that are kind of fighting against each other, if we are just struggling to let go, to go deeper, to heal, to see something, maybe there's a part of us that's blocking us from understanding or seeing something that might be useful or helpful to our healing. IFS is really, really, really good, really useful at resolving these kinds of dynamics. But the other side of the coin that I see with IFS a lot, if I'm going to be frank with you, is that I see a lot of people who kind of confuse the trees, for the forest for the trees, if you will, and they end up only seeing themselves as a collection of parts and losing track of that cohesive sense of whole. And that can really turn, if I'm being honest here, into more fragmentation for a person, where all of a sudden, all we see are all these parts inside of ourselves, and we don't see how they connect or how they relate or what the deeper structure that they're all growing out of is. Again, if all you see is trees and you don't recognize trees as a forest, as a whole system, then that can complicate things and make things harder to heal or make sense of or resolve. So IFS, again, very powerful, very compatible with psychedelics, but something to be mindful of, because it really can end up confusing you more, overwhelming you more, fragmenting you more, this kind of a thing. Anyways, in terms of approaches to using IFS in psychedelic therapy, I would imagine it's low to moderate dose. I would imagine, again, there's therapy up front, and then it's a lot about discussing, unburdening, connecting, listening, releasing the emotions that parts may be holding, and kind of working with the parts to resolve back towards a healed state. So that would be IFS psychotherapy. Okay, so next on the list, I think, is one of the more unique, interesting approaches to psychedelic therapy that I've learned about so far. And this is one that I have a lot of admiration for. I have a lot of curiosity about. I have a lot of respect for. But I would still kind of classify it under this suffer and purge umbrella here. From reports and anecdotes I've seen online, when it works for people, it works really well, but it still can leave some people feeling really shaken up and dysregulated afterwards. And this is the psychedelic somatic approach, or the PSIP psychedelic therapy approach. So as far as I know, this is being pioneered by a psychotherapist named Razvi. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. And the approach generally involves a different set of substances, which I find interesting, and also a much more somatic, body sensation-based approach, which some people get great results with. So the basic idea is, I think it's therapy up front first for, I don't know how many sessions, but I would imagine quite a few. And then most people start with cannabis, it sounds like, either cannabis or ketamine as the primary tools, which is interesting because both of them are softening tools. So, some psychedelics more amplifying, more kind of intense and sharp. cannabis and ketamine are both much more softer to the nervous system, which is very interesting. And then using this kind of softened state to essentially track for body sensations and holding patterns of muscle tension or somatic emotional kind of networks that kind of hold in the issue. And the therapist will encourage the person to just tremor and release and let their body shake out, literally tremor out whatever trauma is being held in the body, sweating, crying, screaming, whatever needs to be done in order to really release the energy at a body somatic level. I think it's really interesting. One of the things that I find most interesting about it is that apparently there's no integration work done afterwards. That generally speaking, once a person is kind of connected to what needs connecting to and released it, they don't need a lot of help with making sense or interpreting the experience. According to Saj. Again, I don't know that I would quite call that integration, as I've said in other videos, but for the sake of kind of good faith discussion here, I think that's really interesting. So this is another approach, is just taking the medicine and kind of tremoring out whatever the fear or the anxiety or the depression or memory or the trauma or whatever it is, and just literally using your body to shake it out. I would imagine there will be parallel approaches out there, probably in the underground already, with somatic experiencing or Hakomi, things like this, that are going to be similar in terms of somatic approaches to psychedelics. And I think in a lot of ways, this is a very smart way to go, because somatic therapies are really good for trauma. And because in a lot of ways, what happens on a psychedelic is that our body's intelligence, it becomes really active, becomes really alive. And so if we're able to tune into that and listen to that and work with that, the healing impulse is already there. That inner healer is already there, knows what what needs to happen. So anyways, that's the psychedelic somatic approach. And let's go ahead and get into the next one. And then the last of these kinds of suffer and purge models to discuss here would be the MAPS MDMA therapy protocol. Again, I know a little bit about this from having read the manual and having taken the MAPS course on just the basics of psychedelics and kind of looking at how MDMA therapy is done. But I'm no expert on this, so I'm sure maybe there's an expert watching. Please correct me if I misunderstand something. But based on what I can understand, it sounds like it's more of a framework for how to approach MDMA therapy. And then the actual modality itself is kind of up to the therapist and their style and their approach. But it sounds like, again, we're back at possibly blindfold, laying down a comfortable bed, 2 therapists present. So this is unique amongst this and the studies, the study model. 2 therapists present, generally a male and a female, so that there's kind of, we're minimizing for transference here or projecting of people's own issues with, their mother or their father or what have you. So there's more quality control with 2 therapists present. And there's a focus, again, on helping the person to kind of go deep into whatever the issue is and reprocess it. So it's a similar suffer and purge thing, but I don't think there's a particular one way that the therapists get them there. It might be somatic. It might be conversational. It might be parts work. It might be some combination thereof. So I think this is a little more open-ended, but the idea, again, is kind of MDMA, 2 therapists, lay down, feel what you feel, access, go into the thing that needs healing, really pay attention to it, process it through, speak what's coming up. And then I think there's usually with MDMA therapy, a booster, somewhere in the 90-minute mark or longer for another kind of small amount of MDMA to kind of just extend the whole thing out further. So that's the basics of the MAPS therapy model. And from the people I know who have done it, they all say great things. So I'm sure it works really well. And I'm sure it also depends on the quality of the therapist, as always, with all of this stuff. So that's the MAPS model. And now we're kind of turning a corner here in the conversation a little bit. So we're kind of exiting the suffer and purge approaches a bit here. So I want to talk a little bit about guided work, because this is another model of psychedelic therapy. And I know some underground therapists who are guides. And it's much more dynamic from what I can tell. So in contrast to say, the psychedelic study model, where it's literally just eye shades and headphones, lay down, tune out. The psychedelic guide model is much more interactive. So it's much more the guide, having a conversation with you, leading your attention in particular places. And what I see a lot when I talk to guides about their work is that they're doing a lot of helping the person to work through stuff or regulate back and forth, depending on what happens with their nervous system when certain things get brought up. So a guide may kind of, support you in feeling safe and entering into a nice space with the psychedelic. And then they may, provoke something or invite you to pay attention to something that might kind of take your attention somewhere where there's a bit of healing work to be done. And then depending on how you respond to that, they may help to take you deeper there, or they may help to kind of, help you regulate that. Or if you end up splitting or dissociating, they'll notice that and help you come back to center. And it's this kind of a thing. So there's a much more dynamic dance back and forth. There may be moments of silence. There may be moments where the guide's singing for you and just kind of holding a prayer space for you while you go through your experience. So guide work is a little more broad as far as I understand it, but it's a little more interactive. There's more of a dance back and forth as opposed to some of the other approaches here. I don't think it's necessarily strictly a suffer and purge model, but I do imagine that that's probably part of the package a lot of the time for guided work. So if you're looking at psychedelic guides, if you're thinking about getting a psychedelic guide, this is something for you to consider is, that level of interactivity. I should probably say with all of these before we go ahead and pivot into the next one here, that all of these models here, besides the psychedelic study model, if you're looking at the psychedelic psychotherapy, MDMA solo, IFS, PSIP, the MAPS, and even the guided work, all of these are much more relational, which poses more of a concern or an issue of transference, countertransference. In other words, you projecting on them projecting on you, boundaries being broken more easily, inappropriate things being said more easily. And it's worth reminding you and saying that when we're on psychedelics, we are highly, highly, highly suggestible and impressionable, for better or worse. So I just want to put that out there because these more interactive models may serve you better or take you further in the sense that this person has these skills and these abilities, but also it's easier for them to slightly say the wrong thing or reframe something in slightly the wrong way for you, or end up approaching something in just the wrong way, or maybe their face just looks a little too much like your dad or your mom, or the other way around. Maybe you're accessing some sort of energy and they end up projecting on you. And it's really easy for these dynamics to get messy and slippery and blurry. And it's really something to be aware of, not only as a therapist, this is something I talk a lot about in psychedelic therapy circles, but also as a client. You want to be like, is that something I want to deal with? Is that something I really want to experience? And how can I have, the best healing I can without things being triggered about, my parents or, whatever, what have you, right? So I want to just kind of put your attention on that for a moment because this matters. This really impacts the kind of outcome you're going to get. So with that being said, those are all the models that I've been able to discern out there, but I want to offer you 3 more models that I've kind of noticed are also doable, possible, that may involve less of this transference issue, less of all this other stuff. There are other approaches to using psychedelics for healing, for therapeutic purposes that I've figured out on my own that I'd love to share with you guys and just see what you think about. So let's get into those. Okay, so the first model that I want to introduce you to and just share my own thoughts about is a model that actually involves microdosing. And I'm happy to talk about this because honestly, in the the psychedelic therapy circles that I see, where I see the conversation happening, microdosing really isn't taken very seriously. First of all, even though I see a lot of kind of anecdotal accounts of people having big breakthroughs and big experiences, I even saw a study, of course, of someone who is accusing microdosing of being all placebo, which I think is nonsense, and I'll be doing a video about that in the near future. But it's not really taken seriously. Like most of the people that I meet or talk to in the psychedelic therapy world are talking about high dose. And I think that that's a big, big mistake, to be frank. I think there's a lot of room for success in therapeutic use of smaller, in other words, micro or moderate doses of psychedelics that may get you better results without risking, the big ab reactions and the big freakouts and the bad trips and whatnot. So the first one I want to share with you here is microdosing. And the way that you could do this, and this is really, when I started this channel, I was talking about how I'd used microdosing to overcome social anxiety. This is what I did. Essentially, you take a microdose and then you combine that with self-directed, or you could do it, with a person who knows how to do this, memory reconsolidation work. Now, memory reconsolidation is a whole topic. It's really very important to the work that I do. And it's a field of therapy that is not well known. It's a field of science that's not well known, that has to do with how we unlock deeply learned, emotions, beliefs, perceptions, thoughts, these kinds of things, and clear all the negative charge out of it. This is something that you can do, sober. You don't need psychedelics to do, and is transformational and will permanently, shift negative emotions. But if you augment this with a microdose, it becomes easier to do, becomes faster to do, and you can work a little bit deeper. So the first thing I would recommend is literally just taking a microdose, learning about coherence therapy is the name of the therapy branch off of memory reconsolidation. We're just learning about memory reconsolidate and how to reconsolidate your own memories. Take a microdose, do a session of this on yourself, and you can have accelerated results with a microdose. So that would be number one. Okay, the next one is kind of something that's done more at a moderate dose of psychedelics, and that would be to combine some sort of a psychedelic, and I think this could be done with your psilocybin, with your LSD, with your MDMA, something like that, where you still have a bit of cognition, especially at a moderate dose level, and then doing parts work with it. So I realize this kind of echoes what I was saying about IFS earlier, but I'm recommending a slightly different approach here, which is to take a moderate dose, maybe do a body scan, look for dark spots in your body, places where you're holding tension, places where there seems to be a lot of emotion coming out of certain parts of your body. This is all very normal on psychedelics. Tuning into that and seeing if there's some sort of energy being held by a part there. And then what you would do is either a parts negotiation, where you're going to really discuss with that part, what it needs, what it wants, what its purpose for being is, and help to just relate to that part and understand perhaps what your body is trying to communicate, or the other thing you can do is a parts integration. So this is one of these things that's taught in neurolinguistic programming, where we take the different parts that are in conflict and we unite them into a greater whole. This work is very powerful, very transformative, something you can do by yourself for sure, if you know how to do it, if you understand the principles behind it, and can be done again at a moderate to even low dose level and have really profound results. So this would be another one that I don't see anyone else doing out there. I really don't. Okay, and last but certainly not least is a model I'd love to share with you guys that I think holds a lot of promise. I think this could be really a whole other way of looking at and approaching psychedelic therapy that I've never seen anyone else mention or bring forth. And so I'm kind of left wondering if I may be the only person this has occurred to so far. But I thought I'd just kind of put it out here for you as another way of thinking about interacting with psychedelics for a therapeutic purpose, just from a whole different paradigm, different angle here. So it goes something like this. instead of using the psychedelic session to do the therapy work, right? In other words, taking the medicine and then going and, going into the issue and trying to, purge out all the negative emotions and all the trauma and stuff. Instead of going that route with it, what about using the psychedelic state for its strength and then doing the therapy work afterwards based on what you experienced? Let me explain what I mean here. So the basic idea is that with psychedelics, if you're just using the psychedelic experience for what it is, you're going to often, they're going to lead you towards mystical experiences, so oneness with life, with God, with the universe experiences, ego death type experiences in the blissful sense. They're going to lead you, if not to a mystical experience, to a big positive emotional state, right? These are super common on psychedelics. Things like universal love, total joy, absolute bliss, absolute peace, feeling deep acceptance, feeling deep inner knowing, deep confidence, deep trust in life. These kinds of powerful, positive resource states are very common on psychedelics. They're and if we orient towards them and we kind of make the focus of the session having one of these big, powerful, positive experiences so that we can learn what it feels like to feel that way at a nervous system level. And that's the focus of the session, right? So then you take these learnings, you take these peak, moments, these peak states of oneness with God and the ecstasy of the universe flowing through you, or feeling profound freedom or profound joy or profound love or whatever it is, right? You take these states afterwards and you do memory reconsolidation work with it, like I mentioned in the microdose section in this video. And you take these powerful states now as kind of leverage or as fuel to transform whatever the original issue that you want to change was. So the basic idea is, imagine that you have the neural path of the problem. And if this neural path were a muscle, it would be a muscle that would be way bigger than the rest of the muscles in your body, because you've overtrained it, because you overthink and over ruminate and over access the negative emotions, the negative thoughts, the negative memories, whatever it is. And it's become this very strong neural path, right, in the brain. And now all of a sudden you have this really strong, robust, new positive emotional state path in the brain that you've learned from this powerful psychedelic experience, from this breakthrough experience you had, right? And the basic idea is that when we connect the dots and we take this powerful positive experience and we connect it back to the negative experience or the negative issue or the negative fear, whatever it is, it will transform it if we do it properly and take the negative emotion and energy out of the issue. Right? And so we can basically use psychedelics for their strength rather than going counter to their tendency. Psychedelics, left to our own devices, will tend to deliver at a high enough dose a mystical experience or these big, powerful, positive experiences, right? So why not use those to kind of get stronger at feeling positive, stronger at feeling peace, stronger at feeling bliss, more used to, more familiar with having these feelings in our nervous system, having our body know, again, what it feels like to feel really, really good, again, building up that neural path of the positivity, then using that outside of the psychedelic session to, boom, go back in and transform whatever the issue is that we want to heal and resolve and let go of and get unstuck from. So again, this is a very different approach because we are not necessarily using the psychedelic doing therapy during the psychedelic. And so this to me seems obvious because you're getting the strength of the psychedelic experience. You're not necessarily burdening yourself with having to do therapeutic work or force your attention in a particular direction, which I think has a subtle unconscious communication to our mind and our nervous system, like, no, we're going to focus on this thing that's painful, or we're going to focus on this thing that needs fixing and needs sorting, where sometimes I think our unconscious mind and our nervous system, or the deep intelligence inside of us, however you want to think of it, knows how to heal. It knows and it's trying to tell us, it's trying to show us. And sometimes it shows us by giving us a really positive experience. And we're like, no, but I want to deal with the pain and I want to, but it's giving you the medicine. It's giving you the thing you need to deal with the pain, right? And so I think this is often a kinder, gentler approach because you're less likely to re-traumatize yourself. It's not intense in a negative way. You're less likely to be dysregulated afterwards. And it really kind of leans into the tendency and the direction that psychedelics lead us in, which again, can be used in a positive, transformative manner. My personal opinion, this is a guess, this is maybe even just a projection. I think a lot of therapists and a lot of, psychiatrists out there think of, psychedelics and their properties of these mystical experiences as actually being a detriment to healing. A lot of times I'll see them say, or write or speak about these kind of powerful, positive bliss moments as if you're bypassing the problem or the issue and you're not healing when you're feeling really good. But I think that that's really because a lot of times these therapists don't know about memory reconsolidation and don't know how to connect the dots between these peak moments and these really powerful, robust, good feelings that we have and connect that back to where the healing needs to go. And what I've found, doing this work with myself is that it's very, very powerful and it's very, very possible. Memory reconsolidation is deep. It's a whole thing. It's a whole other set of topics and videos, but it's really a wonderful way to do the best of both worlds so that, you're doing your therapy when you're sober and you're less likely to become destabilized and you're using the psychedelic space for all of its strengths and not really tempting fate by going into these like heavy emotions and, hoping that you're going to process out of them successfully enough by the end of the session. So that's just another way to go. Again, I'm not saying it's the only way. I'm just saying it's a way that no one else is talking about that could be done. That could be really powerful. So, so those are all of the different forms of psychedelic therapy that I'm currently aware of. Whoa, zoom in on me. Okay, so those are all of the different models and approaches to psychedelic therapy that I'm currently aware of. Again, like I said, there may be some that I've left out here that I don't know about. I may have some of the details wrong about some of these different approaches. I fully own and admit that I have kind of injected my own takes and opinions and perspectives about them along the way here. And I hope that that doesn't leave too bad a taste in your mouth in terms of feeling like I'm too biased about it. But I just want to share all of this out there for you so that you have an idea of all the different ways that this can go and maybe help demystify a little bit for you, because I know there are a lot of you out there who are interested in the topic, curious about how it's done, perhaps looking to have psychedelic therapy for yourself in some form or manner, and just don't know anything about what it is specifically. So I hope I've helped to answer that question a bit for you. I hope you have a bit of a better understanding here of how this tends to work. If you liked anything, agreed, disagreed, please do a favor and leave a comment below. Let's have a good conversation about it. And I guess that covers it for now. Yeah. So have a great day. Have a great week. I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.